So good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Portugalist webinar with Sandra Gomes Pinto, our sort of resident legal expert for everything related to moving to Portugal. Sandra has been on many, many times before and answered a lot of questions about the D7, the D8, the Golden Visa, all of those visas, and yet we still have more and more questions that we need answers to. So she's very kindly agreed to come back on and answer these questions that people have sent in. And so thank you, everybody, for sending those in. And sorry to anybody who didn't make the cut. Some people were sending them in sort of like within the last couple of minutes. And Sandra, I'm sure, has a wealth of knowledge in her brain, but there's sometimes that she needs to research them just to make sure that we're getting exactly the correct information. Sandra, perhaps for those who haven't heard you before, you'd be willing to introduce yourself and SGP and a little bit about what it is that you do.
So I'm a lawyer in Portugal for 30 years. I did a lot of things. I was a partner of a big firm, mainly in litigation, arbitration, and foreign investment. I always worked with foreign clients and internationally, and from day one with some American clients. Lately, in the last 8 years, 10 years, I have my own firm. And at this point, we are focusing a lot, although we do other things and have other departments. We focus a lot on assisting people moving to Portugal, and we have a legal team, and we try to make a flawless process and also to be a partner in also the move to Portugal in order to make the relocation itself smoother, happier, calmer for all those that are moving here. This is our goal, and I have a team mainly of women, very committed, very, very hardworking, and their goal is also they like people, they like to be of assistance, they like to be of service, and their goal is to make people to have a better way in a smoother and a happier and without a flawless move to Portugal. This is our goal.
Okay, well, thank you, Sandra. I can definitely attest to the fact that you guys work really, really hard. I see emails flying around every hour of the day and all throughout August as well.
Yes, and even in August, as you know, we were working hard, and it really demands effort to work well. Everybody's having vacation. It really demands an extra effort from our side.
Well, I'm very sure that the people who were moving during that time of year appreciate that. Should we start with some of the questions then, Sandra?
Of course.
Let's see. So we're going to do some D7 questions, which is the visa that's mainly used for retirees. Before we get into some of these more challenging questions, can you give a sort of a basic overview of what the D7 is and who it's suitable for?
So the D7 is for all those that have passive income. Passive income means income they don't have to work for, such as Social Security, dividends, royalties, rentals. These all fall into the category of passive income. Whereas the D8, now in many places called D9, is the visa for all those that are working but being paid by a foreign entity, and irrespective of the form of work they do. So they can have a labor contract, they can be an entrepreneur, they can have a company. It's people that are working in Portugal remotely, but being paid by a foreign entity. And this is the common known D8, now in many consulates called D9, for all those that are working, whereas, and I will repeat to clarify for those that don't know, the D7 is for all those that have passive income. Passive income means income they don't have to work for, such as Social Security, rentals, dividends, royalties, as an example. So these are particularly the two types of visa.
Okay, perfect.
Do you want me to continue, or are you going to? Because I think there are more to it to explain the two visas.
There is a little, yes, maybe continue on the D7, the requirements that someone might need. Like how much passive income would someone need?
So there are three pillars of requirements, three main requirements: a financial one, a proof of accommodation, and a third requirement in terms of an FBI background check. These would be the three main requirements. In terms of the financial requirements, it's required that a person earns on average 820 euros per month, which is the actual Portuguese minimum wage, plus 50% for the spouse if you, as a main applicant, are bringing your spouse as an accompanying family member, and also 30% for each child you are bringing. You have to add that to the initial 820 euros. So these are the financial requirements of the D7. You also will have to have deposit in your bank account, 1 year Portuguese minimum wage, which is, it's better to have. The more you have, the better. So, but at least minimum would be to have something like 10,000 euros in your bank account, if in the Portuguese bank account, if you're coming under a D7 visa.
Okay, and I know you said dependent children there. Some people may be thinking about older parents who might be dependent on them financially or for care. Is there like a sort of set rule for who would qualify and how much income the main applicant would need there?
I think in that case, the rule would be this is not written anywhere. So there are lots of unwritten rules and common habitual attitudes and behaviors. So there are many things related to this visa and applicable rules that are not in the law. But a dependent parent, I would say, would be treated as a dependent child. But it would be important also that you show that you have enough income to provide for this parent. So I would say in such case, it would make sense that you show that you have on top of your main financial amounts, 30% for each parent, but you also have to show that your parent is a dependent from a financial point of view, that you're somehow already providing for your parent. But the thing is, many parents, especially parents in the US, they have enough financial means to come on their own. So in many of those cases, I think it would be a more straightforward and a more interesting approach that a family comes all together, but the parent could come under his own visa, because the majority of the elderly Americans do have enough financial means to provide for their own D7. So I think that would be perhaps a good approach, a good way to do it. But that would be on the case. We would have to study and see what would make more sense in that specific situation.
Okay, and we've had these conversations before on here about the D7. Is there anything new in the world of the D7 visa?
Yes, there are lots of new things, but I would like just to clarify 2 or 3 things which I think is very important for the D7 and the D8, the digital nomad visa. Both these visas are residential visas, so they demand you to reside in Portugal, but they do not require investment, which is a huge benefit, and it's a very good visa and competitive visa within the existing visas in the European Union. So these are residential visas. They require you to reside in Portugal, but they not require investment. And they are also a very good route to citizenship, and they are a route to citizenship as a golden visa would be, or as any other means would be. So they are also a very interesting door to pursue later. And if you meet other requirements, the Portuguese citizenship, which would allow you also to have an European citizenship and the status of an European citizen, which would allow you to choose to live in any European country, to live, to work, to reside, to retire, to study in any of the European countries, which is worldwide a major advantage. So I think it's important to clarify. You were asking me about the novelties of the D7.
Yes.
And we each day, each day we learn something new. And we pick an important detail because we try to collect and to learn from the experience of each client. Just very recently, and I think this is end October, Washington just said that from now on, that they would require that the FBI background check should be apostille, and that is not enough to have a sealed envelope. Was very recent in the list of documentation, and we talked with them and they confirmed it, that from now on, they would want the clients to have a FBI background check apostilled, and it would not be enough to have a sealed envelope. We already noticed that that was the practice in the UK and in some places in Canada, but this was the first time that a consulate in the US told us that they would require an apostille criminal record. And this is a major novelty. Whereas we had some other clients that had appointments in Newark, and in Newark, they said they still accepted the sealed envelope. So it's really important to be very attentive and to understand how the process is evolving and about these little details. Just very, very recently, we had another client that told us that San Francisco was not accepting credit cards and debit cards as main of payment of their fee. So they did ask for a money order or a cashier's check, and they wrote what was the amount, and they even wrote in the site that they were entitled to change the value of this amount each month. So
Okay.
it's very important that you know exactly what is the amount you are going to put in the money order on the cashier's check to make sure that this amount meets the requirements. And it's important to know that in some exceptional cases, they accept walk-ins. They have accepted, but for the walk-ins, they do an extra charge. So it's these small details that you are always gathering, and they are super important. Another aspect that we see developing in a different way for the digital nomad visa, and also for the D7, they were asking in when there is a family reunion that also the family member coming, that the family member also issues and produces a personal statement. And in some cases, they asked that in the family member also presents the financial means of the main applicant that it presents again. So it's still subjective. So we cannot say that this will be the rule everywhere. Some of the officers will do like this, some will do differently. But what we try for our clients is, and as a disclaimer, what we most of the cases ask more than what will be needed, but we wanted to make sure that a person has a bulletproof process that has anything that's in according to the knowledge we have until one day, that can have basically anything they might ask. We
Okay.
are also understanding that in the D8, they are becoming more and more demanding in the digital nomad visa. So in many cases, if you have a company, it would be important to bring documentation of the company. Even if you are a solo entrepreneur, it's very important that you have a declaration issuing that you can work remotely. It would be important if you have a company to bring the tax return of the company. It's many little details in order for them to make sure that the thing is real and that the person really has the means to come. Other aspect, I believe the authorities are being more and more demanding in terms of leases. They also make sure the lease is registered before the tax authority. In many cases, they want to see a receipt. In some cases, they even ask for the mobile of the landlord, and they wanted to see the transfer of the money. So because there were many people using fake or scams or fake leases, so they want to make sure that the person actually does have a real proof of accommodation to come to the country.
Okay.
We analyze that the process is evolving. For instance, Manchester, it's very, very demanding, had many specificities. Even in respect to children, they also ask for terms of responsibility of the parents, sometimes, not always. So we do see that the process is becoming more and more demanding with time.
Okay, it does sound like it's getting a little complicated. It sounds like you could think you know how much money you need to have on the money order, and you've got last month's number, and actually it's gone up, so your money order is now potentially
Yes,
useless.
you have to be very attentive because they say that this is the amount they have in the site, but they reserve themselves the right to change this amount on the 25th of each month. For instance, this is what San Francisco does. So you do have to be very attentive. As you know, in terms of novelties, at this point, San Francisco was taking a very long time to stamp the passports, 2 or 3 months, in many cases more than 3 months. So, and this was not the usual time frame we had. So there are always little novelties happening. What we understand is with the new IMA is that the IMA has a greater intervention in the process in the beginning, and is getting less complicated by the time you have the IMA appointment. They many times have every documentation presented in VSF or in the consulate, and they just ask for an update on the documents and approve of residency. So the last part is getting less demanding, and they are getting more demanding on the first part of the process.
Okay. Good, good to know. And I just want to let people know that we have a Q&A section where you can ask questions. Can already see someone typing a question in the chat. If you could ask it in the Q&A section, it'll get answered by her team. The ones in the chat are just for you to say where you're from and chat amongst yourselves.
There was someone asking whether we help with visas and tax planning. Yes, we do have several international tax experts working with us. So we work both with visas and also tax planning. This is also a theme we cover.
And Sandra, I imagine a lot of people are going to want to get in touch with you following seeing how useful you are. I understand you're quite busy at the moment. If people do want to get an appointment, is this possible?
Yes, it is possible. Send us an email and we will accommodate the person ASAP. Yes, of course. I think it's always better when people give us a little insight about their plans, how soon they want to move to Portugal, and a little bit details about their particular situation. I think with how many family members, what's the general income, what type of income they have. If they provide us with details, it can be easier for us and for my team to process and to advance and to guide them. But of course, people can reach out to us, and it will be a pleasure to assist. And at this time, we know the process better and better. So we've helped hundreds of people, so we do know what we are talking about and have a lot of experience. And each day, as you know, each day we learn, and each day we try to have our own guides and to make sure. And we have a triple checking, so we check, double check, triple check. So by the time our clients get to the consulate, there should be no problems, and they should feel very reassured about the process.
Okay, perfect. And Sandra has very kindly offered I think the first 50 people who get in touch free 15-minute consultation. There is a secret code that you need, which I'm going to share in the chat now. I will also share this over email, so don't worry if you don't get it. But the code is Portugalist plus SGP, and it's going in the chat, and it has your email address as well. So if you want to take advantage of that, please do. Sandra, I'm going to jump onto some more questions. Because there's a couple of things I wanted to say there. I think you mentioned character references coming up there. This isn't something I've heard before about the D7.
Yes, but this is something that can be done, and I think that can be advantages. So you can have a Portuguese friend or a lawyer writing something of a recommendation letter. I think it's impactful. We have starting to do this, and what we notice is whenever we do this, there are documents that the person in the VFS or consulate collects and documents that they let. And this is the kind of document that they collect and they put in the file. So it's a relevant document that that's a person that you know, that you have. So a recommendation letter from a Portuguese friend, your Portuguese lawyer, it's relevant and could be an advantage in the process.
Okay, so someone working with you, they might get a character reference from you or someone on your team, and then a
Yes,
family.
or their friends in Portugal. I think it's important for the Portuguese authorities. This is important, and I think this is important because I believe. Then I told you I have been telling you this. I think these requirements are not very demanding, and the financial requirement we don't require in Portugal any investment, and the financial requirement is only a Portuguese minimum wage. And I believe that sooner or later this will get more complicated because I think Europe doesn't want that Portugal is just an open door to Europe, irrestricted, because also Portugal is small. Europe has limited places and resources. So I think these requirements will be perhaps in the future more complicated. So I think for those that want to take advantage of this, it's better to advance now.
I completely agree. It does seem like it's one of the easiest residency visas in Europe when I've looked at other ones, and surely it can't last forever.
Yes, I think so too. So it's better to take advantage where in the moment where the requirements are relatively low. I would like also to now in our office we added a new Zoom consultation just before the VFS appointment and just before the VFS or the consulate appointment, because I think it's very important that people have some guidance in respect how they should react and how should they behave in the VFS appointment. It's important to know that this appointment will not have the structure of an interview. It will be more a documentation review. And it's important also to have that according to Portuguese law, people are entitled to, if there's a document or a formality missing, that they should be provided with a reasonable amount of time to solve this formality and this problem. And also, if there is a proposal for denial or a proposal for a negative decision, the person should be able to present allegations to questions or to challenge this proposal for denial of the application. So I think it's always wise to be agreeable in such an appointment, but still yet assertive and ask for a written decision and also ask for the grounding or the reasoning behind some decision, and this is provided in written. We had some months ago a D89 client that I already told this story, but I think it's relevant, that he had a labor contract in the US, but it's not written. And so that he had a proposal for denial. And then we presented allegations stating that in the US, as it is in Portugal, it is not demanded, it's not mandatory to have a written contract when you have a labor contract. And this was fully accepted by the authorities because they know what is what are the Portuguese rules and what are the US rules. So it's important to have the proper guidance to behave properly and to react in the right way whenever you are in the VFS appointment. And that makes a difference on how relaxed and how if you were guided before and you know how to react, you feel calmer and it's definitely a more pleasant appointment than if you don't have the proper guidance.
Okay, and I think we've heard before that you need a personal statement, or it's certainly
Yes.
helpful. Is this just for the main applicant, or should everybody on the visa have one?
Initially, we only had it for the main applicant, but now we understand that that in many cases they are asking this for the family members that are accompanying the main applicant. So my would advise is that everybody gets a personal statement, and if they don't want it, there is no problem, but at least you have it.
Okay. It's a good idea. And is there any recommendations you have for the personal statement? Like,
Yes.
how should someone present themselves?
I think we like genuine people, and I think that is impactful
Okay.
whenever you are writing. So we always ask our clients to write the reasons why they are moving to Portugal. I think this is very important in the personal statement. Of course, it always looks good if you tell that you want to learn Portuguese, and we hope you do if you want to come to Portugal, that you'll be helping and adjusting to the community. I think no other option is accepted for us Portuguese, and also that you cherish one of the oldest nations in Europe, that you cherish and that you appreciate the history, the democracy, the values. I think this is quite important. Normally, also in the end of the personal statement, we advise our clients to put an index of all the documentations they will be attaching to the application, special the financial means, and also the lease, and they specify where they will be living. But I think an index of all the documentation that will be attached to the application, I think it's relevant and may simplify the work of a person analyzing their process. So I would say these are basically the the most important advice. I would also say that for the US and US Portuguese consular authorities do demand that you have a notarized personal statement, and also in the UK. But for instance, the application form, UK doesn't like a notarized application form, whereas the consular authorities in the Portuguese consular authorities in US want a notarized application form. But
Okay.
in London, in the UK, they will take you out of the process because they don't want it notarized.
Okay. That's confusing. And for those that don't understand these words like notarized, apostilled, unsealed envelopes, all these sort of terms for how a document can be presented, what do they each mean?
So a sealed envelope, I think it's easy. So it's an unopened envelope. But
Okay.
also in respect to the unsealed envelope of the FBI background check, I have an important advice. Please ask for a digital version also, because we had an elderly couple that didn't open the envelope, didn't ask for digital version. And when they opened the envelope before the VSF officer, it was written, "We could not recollect your fingerprints because they could not, it was not possible." So they had to ask for time to present a criminal record. So I would advise, if you have if you are applying for a place that would still accept a sealed envelope, which at this point in the office, we always ask for an FBI background check with apostille just to prevent. But if you're bringing a sealed envelope, please ask for a digital version. So beforehand, you are sure of the content of what you will be receiving.
Okay. And then notarized and notarized people might be familiar with, and
Yes.
then apostilled.
Apostille. So there is something that's the Convention of Hague, which
Okay.
most of the countries had entered into as a curiosity. Canada just entered in January this year. But this is a convention that make possible for public foreign documents to travel and to be valid elsewhere other than the country that issued this documentation. For instance, if you have a birth certificate, a marriage certificate, a death certificate, the apostille from a US document, the apostille is with the apostille, the American authorities are saying to the Portuguese authorities, this document complies with US laws and therefore it should be valid in Portugal. Because the Portuguese authorities do not have the means or the knowledge to verify whether an American document complies with US laws. So this is to make possible for public foreign documents to travel and to be valid everywhere in the world.
Okay. That makes perfect sense.
Most of the countries in the world entered into this convention with the curiosity that until very recently Canada had not entered, and just in January this year Canada also entered the Convention of Hague, and therefore the Canadian documents can also be apostilled.
Okay, perfect. Let's see what questions we have next. I have an interesting and very specific one here. So we have a couple. One person in the couple is American. The other person is Chinese. They're both resident in the US. One is a green card holder, and the other person is a citizen. They're going to apply together to move to Portugal. Is the person who's the non-American or who's going to have like a harder time or an easier time? Is like how does it work with couples of different nationalities?
I think this person will immediately, I would not say a harder time, but at least will have to deal with more documents. So the Chinese person, it would be advisable that a Chinese person presents, and we had a case like this, and they wanted both the criminal record of the country of origin, of nationality, and the criminal record of the country of legal residency. So probably it's advisable to get both criminal records. And of course, you have to translate the Chinese and apostille also the Chinese criminal record. So immediately it's more complex. You'll have more work. And if you are applying, being a Chinese, if you are applying in the US, it is mandatory that you present a document stating that you are legally resident in the US. This is an additional document that you have to present. So I would have that if you have a different nationality and if you have to bring more documentation that will be in another language other than the English language, of course, I would not say it's much harder, but definitely it will be more complex and more troublesome and will demand more work because more jurisdictions will be involved, more languages will be involved, more documentations will be demanded.
And if you were getting a document translated, for example, from Chinese to English or to Portuguese, could you just go to a translator, or would you need a special translator who deals in legal documents?
I would perhaps with Portuguese bureaucracy is one of the only place that more is better than less. So I would always go to an official translator and would have an official translation. I don't want because of a small issues to jeopardize the situation of my client in terms of visa.
Okay, so no Google Translate then.
Yes, I would
Let's
not advise you to do that.
so one
Uh,
of the other requirements that comes up is the NIF, the Portuguese tax number, and the bank account. Some people are sort of wondering, when should you get this? Most people probably think, oh, I'll wait to the last minute. But is there an advantage to getting these, say 6 months earlier or possibly even a year earlier?
I think 1 year to do. I think it makes all the sense to do it earlier. As you probably are familiar and with so many people reaching out to you, James, for sure you know that it's difficult, and it's very difficult for many, many people when there are non-resident to open bank accounts in the Portuguese if they just go to a branch of a Portuguese bank account. They are getting more and more restrictive in terms of opening bank account for non-residents. And this is something that we here in the office do it quite efficiently. But then the compliance departments of the banks, sometimes they take ages, they raise complex and additional questions. It's still not a standardized process. Portugal does have an anti-money laundering act. And also to the Russian war, I think that there are more and more demands in terms to understand who this person is, what's the origin of the money. And it's the banks, the banking system have each day more the necessity to know your client, to know the person they are dealing with. So it can be quite complex and a process that takes a while to open a bank account in Portugal. So I would advise, if you had made the decision to move, to come, I would advise, I think it would make all the sense to get these out of the way as early as possible.
I agree with you, Sandra. I see a lot of people thinking like, oh, maybe I'll get the NIF number before, but I'll open the bank account when I come to Portugal, thinking they'll walk into a bank and open it. It'll take, maximum an hour, and then they'll go and find an apartment and do everything else. But you could get rejected from several banks, and you're wasting time that you could be doing something like looking for an apartment, which is much more important than a bank account, which you can get done remotely through someone like yourself or another service.
Of course, definitely. It may be very complicated just to enter into a bank and ask to open a bank account. It can be very, very complicated. You know it.
I
The
know.
Portuguese bureaucracy and how banks operate. And there were also some Portuguese banks that were victims of scams of less serious people. And so the Portuguese banking the system is very cautious in respect to opening bank accounts to foreigners.
Yes, absolutely. And even just queuing in a Portuguese bank, if you go in at the same time as everyone else, you might end up spending a lot more time there than you want to.
Yes, and what we are noticing as the banking system, and I think all over the world, they have less and less personnel, more and more demanding procedures, and that can make it even more difficult and complex.
Okay. So one more question, and this is, if I'm applying for the D7, I know I need to start paying this, or I presume I need to start paying this 820 euros as an individual into my Portuguese bank account. At what point do I need to pay? Does this need to start coming in every month? Can I hold off until I've moved to Portugal, or should it start coming in before then?
Yes, as you know, there are no written rules about this. So from a very, very practical perspective, what we notice is that the authorities from VSF and the consulate, they only check sometimes what's the total amount in the bank account. They do not check whether you have 820 euros coming into the bank account, at least in an early stage. So when you go to the VFS, the important is because many times people just opened the bank account very recently, so they didn't have the time to start putting these amounts on a monthly basis.
Okay. That makes sense. And the year's worth of savings that's needed then at the sort of VSF consulate stage, is it? So people would need to make that transfer.
I didn't understand your question, James. Can you
Of course.
repeat it,
S-
please?
So one of the other requirements is that you show a year's worth of savings,
Yes, yes,
but they would need to transfer that before the appointment
yes,
for
yes.
VSF. Or
Roughly, if they have 10,000 euros in the bank account until now, I think it's the minimum. If they can show a little bit more, the better. But this is if you're coming as a main applicant only, because I would advise if you're bringing a spouse, also put extra 50% and 30% for each child. Again, there are no written rules about this, but I think our advice is always that you play safe.
okay. Um, and then in terms of the appointment, the consulate appointment, and later the IMA appointment, can you give people an idea of what these are like and maybe what the differences are between them?
So basically, in both situations, this is a documentation checking process and not an interview. So they should not ask you your political views or anything very complex. They basically will check all the documents you have. So in the first appointment, they do a preliminary analysis. They check if you have everything, and they put in a file all your documentation. And if there's any problem, the VFS officer can do a first analysis and can state and verify there's something missing, but they do a formal preliminary analysis, but this decision is taken always by the Portuguese diplomatic authority in the first stage. And if they miss something, then can give you a time to comply with what is missing or to present any allegations. I would say the first step is very important. And we are noticed that in the first step, also sometimes the immigration agency in Portugal has some intervention. So I would say the more complex, the more demanding part is the first stage. In the second stage, you have to fill in new forms. You have to update the documentation. You have to show some proof of residency, sometimes a certificate from the parish that you're residing in Portugal, and some utility bills on your name so they know that you're residing in Portugal. But the second one, as a general rule, is more a confirmation of the latest documents and an update of documentation and a final proof of residency. And also, they generally take your biometrics for the 2 years residency permit card in the second appointment.
Okay, perfect. I wanted to ask about the accommodation requirement. Normally, someone rents or buys a house or has a letter of invitation. Is it possible to just rent a room so that you can keep your costs lower?
Definitely, we know of people that use that possibility. Um, but we also know persons that try that possibility and they faced obstacles and problems. So I would always check with the specific consulate or diplomatic authority whether they would accept. I think if the person has the possibility to rent an apartment, even if it's a very, very small thing, in a less posh area, I would always, my advice is to get an apartment, perhaps outside of a big city. But I think it's always better to get a lease than a room. This would
Okay.
be always my advice.
Perfect. And now jumping on to the D8, some people have been asked for a NIS which is the social security number. Can you explain sort of why they're getting asked for this, and is this a common requirement, and how would they get one?
Um, We have extensive experience with that. In the first stage, they never ask for NIS in the
Okay.
VFS. We've never heard of this. In the second stage, we used to get NISs for our clients, or at least a declaration that they were exempted from having a NIS. So we always did that. But then we start notice on a regular basis that they didn't want that document. That was not necessary. So lately, we have not been providing these documents, and this has not been a problem for us. But we might get it in the future, but now we are not getting this document. I would say perhaps IMA in Lisbon is one of the most demanding places. So we will have some appointments in Lisbon, and Lisbon, perhaps to our clients, will get this documentation at least stating that they had no labor income, so that they are exempted from having a NIS.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you for that. And I just realized I called it the D8. You mentioned earlier some people are no
No,
longer
yes,
calling it
yes,
that.
yes. The consulates wrote us the D8 is no longer a D8. From now on, it's a D9.
Okay. Any reason for that?
I haven't, I didn't have the time to look why,
Okay.
but they stated more than once that the D8 is no longer a D8, now it's a D9. But I will try to understand why, which I have not yet.
Okay. I mean, I think most people call it the digital nomad visa, which is
Yes, but it's also, that also can lead to misconceptions, because if you think of a digital nomad, you might assume that you have to have a digital profession or a tech profession to apply for that visa, and that is not the case. So you can be a doctor, a psychology, you can even paint and send your paintings elsewhere, or do sculpture or something very traditional and manual. So it's digital nomad visa, but you can do any work as long as it's being paid by a foreign entity, and you are doing remotely residing in Portugal. So that name, sometimes I'm a little bit careful, because I think it can be misleading, because any person from any profession, in respect of a labor contract or a company or a solo entrepreneur or an independent service provider, anyone working remotely in Portugal but being paid by a foreign entity can use this type of visa. And therefore, I many times avoid to use digital, because I do believe it can lead to misconception and it can be a little bit misleading.
Yes, I've seen another misconception. One person thought maybe it would give them the right to reside in Portugal, but then travel the world whenever they want. And, it was a misconception that they didn't have to really live in Portugal.
Yes, they do have to reside in Portugal, but also it's possible for the persons to, then they can travel once they have the visa, to travel freely within the Schengen space, which is quite an advantage.
And for those that are going to work remotely, they have a job elsewhere, perhaps in the US or the UK or somewhere. They're going to work in Portugal. Do they need any kind of documentation that says that they are allowed to work remotely and that it has been approved by their company?
Definitely. This is
Okay.
definitely a document and a statement that is being asked on a regular basis by the entities. So this is something they should provide. Sometimes, sometimes we even ask, if it's a solo entrepreneur, please write yourself a statement allowing you to work remotely and put your stamp on it. It's really mandatory to have this kind of document.
Okay. Um, okay, that's an interesting one.
Because if you don't have the documents, they will ask for it, and it will be a problem. And I think it's better to prepare the document other than to argue with them why
mhm.
it doesn't make sense that you yourself write a document authorizing yourself to work remotely. So it's better to adjust.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Better to be prepared for all eventualities. We've got some, let's see if we've got some other questions on visas here. I think we've covered most of the ones that came up before. So I'm going to jump on to sort of family reunification now. So there's two areas I want to cover here. The first one is where one person in the couple is an EU or perhaps an
Mhm.
EEA or Swiss citizen. They can move to Portugal fairly easy. Their partner's going to join them. What's the process for that partner and let's say the main applicant moving to Portugal?
If you are a EU resident, you have to register, it's the crew, you have to register before the city council. You have to, each city council, the different city councils have different practices and different documentation within a certain criteria, but it's important to check where you will reside and to schedule an appointment with the city council, which normally it's not a big issue, but you have to check what is the specific documents each city council asks for. So you as an European citizen register as a resident in Portugal. Once you are registered, then your family member should apply, get an appointment in IMA, present the documents that show the ties to the husband or the wife, because they can reside here through these ties, and also the proof of residency. Some additional documents are required, but as you know, the big challenge at this point is to get an IMA appointment, which is quite difficult.
Okay. And then if both people in the couple are non-EU citizens, one person is already residing here, is the
Mhm.
process more or less the same? Does the other person come and have to have an IMA appointment as well?
Yes, yes, it's more
Okay.
or less the same. It's more or less than the family reunification in the, if you do it everything in the early stage, but now you have to do it in a IMA appointment.
Okay.
Because it's relatively recent that you as a family member can initiate the process at the same time as the main applicant. 2 years ago, this is not so. So there's the main applicant should do the process till the end, and then you as a family member had the right in Portugal to schedule an IMAN appointment and to come, but just after the main applicant had the process approved. This was how it was until 2 years ago. Two, more or less 2 years ago, the law changed, and now the family member can apply on an early stage at the same time as the main applicant.
Okay. And so you mentioned there that it's hard to get an IMA appointment,
Yes.
especially as I understand for family reunification.
I
Um,
think for family reunification to renew the visa, it's
okay, for
hard
a
to
lot
get
of
an
things.
IMA appointment. For golden visa, it's hard to get an IMA appointment. Yes.
Okay, with that
But
in mind,
we've seen recent news that they hired lots and lots of lawyers to speed up the process. So help is the last thing to that we have always.
okay.
We do need help. So next time we will discuss in the next webinar how speedy and how efficient IMA is being, probably.
Okay, so hopefully a hopeful webinar on the cards. So my question here, I guess, is knowing that at the moment, at least, it's hard to get an IMA appointment. So if I was the American in the relationship and my French partner was already there, I
Mm.
could go to Portugal, join them, try and get an IMA appointment,
Yeah.
or could I also apply for like, the D7 or the D8
Yes,
and
you
apply
also could
separately?
apply for D7 or D8, and I think as things are now, this might be a reasonable possibility. But we will have to discuss, these things have to be discussed case by case. But this might be a good possibility, yes.
Okay. And if I was doing this and I was thinking, oh, I'm, being smart here, I'm gonna definitely get in. I understand some of the IMA appointments aren't granted automatically when you apply for a D7 or D8. Could I end up getting to Portugal and still sort of having the same issue of trying to get an appointment?
Most cases, they get the IMA appointments by the time they get the passport stamp. Most cases
Okay.
like this. I think it's still an exception when you don't have the appointments when the passport is stamped.
Okay.
But
Perfect. That it,
then again, if you face this problem, there's always the possibility to get a judicial injunction to get the IMA appointment because you are entitled to have this appointment.
okay.
There is a certain time frame for the administrative entities to answer. So if they don't, they can be forced by a tribunal, by a court to get to grant an IMA appointment.
Okay. Now one of the main things that people are going to be considering here, especially if they aren't an EU citizen, is applying for Portuguese citizenship after they're eligible. A main requirement of that is to show an A2 level of Portuguese. Could I, if I'm really good at, really enthusiastic in year one, could I take the exam then, or would the certificate expire and I'd have to take it again when the time comes?
I've never seen, I've checked and double checked, I never seen an expiring date for an A2 level. Although this is not written anywhere, I think perhaps you should learn the language. You should get an A2 level, another level of the language. But I would check just before entering your nationality process. I would check whether the authorities would accept an A2 level of the exam or not. With an
An
5
old
years
date.
or 4 years of existence. So I've never seen written anywhere or in any law that the A2 has an expiring date, but just before submitting the nationality process, I will double check with the entities whether they would accept an A2 level that is 4 or 5 years old.
I can understand that. I mean, we all learned languages at
Yeah.
school. 4 years later, you do start to forget quite a bit. And if you're only at the A2, which is the upper beginner, you could be, dropping down quite a bit and
Yeah.
below the legal requirements.
Mhm. Yes, that might be the case. Nevertheless, I may admit that in some cases they would accept a 5-year-old A2. It's not written, but this is the issue where there might be some discretionary powers of the entity. And if you do want a nationality to go well, it's better to play safe.
Okay. One thing that's been in the news, I'm not sure if it's set in stone yet, but there's a lot of interest in attracting under 35s to Portugal.
Yeah.
There's talks of a tax break, at least for the sort of first year or so. Talks of preferential mortgages for under 35s. Do you know anything about this, Sandra?
I know, and last year we went to California and we talked with the consul back then, and the Portuguese consul he had very clear instructions from the Portuguese government back then to attract young people, ideally with tech activities. So I believe there will be more and more incentives for digital nomads, for those with innovative tech projects, for those that want young people that want to come to Portugal and want to go to remote areas. I think there are very interesting alternatives and things that could be studied. I think that if you are a young person and have an interesting project, it might be an interesting option to contact the municipal activities, the city council, and talk with them about your projects, and also to negotiate even some deals. I just know that, for instance, some subsidiaries of IBM, for instance, in Tomar, they created a SAP expert, and they did interesting cooperations with the Polytechnic Institute, because Portugal also, for some international companies and also for young people, Portugal meets a lot of dots. So we are proficient in English. Our internet definitely, and I had the experience, is much better than in California. The wages are not that big, so Portugal could be also a super interesting. Most people are very proficient in tech and digital, so I think Portugal, for many young persons, especially with a family that want a more relaxed life, could be a very interesting opportunity. And I think there might be there might be the possibility, and this is a little bit new, for the person to try to contact the municipalities, the city councils of a little less posh areas, and to see if they could develop any project there, and if they could be negotiate some benefits. I think this is a real and a serious possibility, because also the local authorities are interested in attracting new projects, interesting projects, and also the Portuguese government already gave some tax incentives for those that are living in less in outside of the big cities. So I think this is really interesting for many reasons, um, just out of curiosity. But and also these places, definitely these are places where foreigners can lead a more affordable life,
Hmm.
and definitely a healthier and a happier life, which for young people with kids may make all the sense. I had some cousins that, for instance, live in Tomar, so I have this example. And 2 or 3 years ago, they had the kids having private swimming lessons because they found out they didn't swim well enough, and the cost was 10 euros per hour. So you can really lead a more affordable and a healthier life and a happier life in those places. So I think Portugal could be very attractive for people below the 35. And
Hmm.
just out of curiosity and giving an example, I was in California, and I talked with a lot of Portuguese, with Portuguese tech people and people that had very interesting jobs there. But what I understood is that it was not possible for the wife, when they had kids, it was not possible for the wife and the husband to have jobs. The wife had a profession, and it was not possible with kids for the wife to keep up and still have professional fulfillment. Whereas if you perhaps you would definitely earn less money, but you could, I think Portugal could be a very interesting possibility for young couples, especially for those that would like to raise a family.
I agree. It's definitely one of the most family-focused countries that I
Yes,
have been
yes.
to.
Sometimes, sometimes I now people will kill me, but sometimes when I go to London, or even with Austria or something, I feel in some restaurants they are definitely Portugal is more kids friendly and children friendly. Sometimes I feel outside of Portugal that they will welcome very well if you are coming to the restaurant with a dog. But if you are coming with a kid making a little bit of noise, they immediately will look down on you as if you were um, bringing some crazy person.
It is true. One thing that I remember noticing the first time about Portugal is you go into a restaurant, or a cafe, and you see all generations. You see, young children, and you see
Yes,
granny and
yes,
granddad and everyone
yes,
in between, and everybody's together, the whole
yes.
culture. There isn't, this, they aren't separated out.
Yes, yes. And I think there has been recent studies that this family notion that we also in Portugal are losing, although it's still one of the countries with family values, but this coexistence of different generations, I think is one of the secrets for longevity and for happiness overall. But yes, and this is Portugal still has some interesting values.
Still has, definitely, and you're right. Countries are losing it, but Portugal is one of the last remaining places, maybe.
Yes. And what we notice, and I really like to know our clients and to talk with them. And we just recently had some clients say, we are hip here and we feel extremely welcome. And the kindness, the welcoming resonates with us. Where we come from, we always almost fear that when there is any traffic problem, we fear to look at the person with a more steady eye, because this can lead to lots of problems and confusions. I think we see all over the world society and people that are very polarized based on politics, based on gender, based on race. And I think Portugal still we are still accepting and moderate and tolerant, which is super important. I have been seeing and watching, and also the recent trip to California made me clear, and the persons from my team that also went with me, it's understood how polarized this society is, and how competitive it can be. And so it was very clear why people were moving, when we had the opportunity to see some of the discussions of the persons that we met and talked with.
I agree with that. For definitely, Sandra. I think I've been to California as well, and to
Yes.
other parts of the world that people are applying from, and they are all beautiful. But yeah, I agree that nothing compares to Portugal. Um,
Yes, and I think there are disadvantages that we are aware of. Wages are not as the one you have in the US. Perhaps for young people, in terms of professional opportunities, I think there might be, if people do want to start something new, that there might but it's always very troublesome. So there are also problems in Portugal. But just, and I will leave this last note. I met with a friend in San Francisco. Back then she was vice consul, and she had a problem with a dog, and she had to spend, I think I already told this story, but I think it's interesting to repeat. And she had to stay overnight with the dog because he had a lungs problem in California in a vet hospital, and she paid $8,000. Then she already had, it was the only time she would come to Portugal in Christmas to see the family. So she had already the trip booked, and she really didn't want to miss it. And so she came to Portugal with the ill dog and
okay.
went to a vet hospital here. And they told her beforehand, so before doing the treatment, which is not the norm in the US, they told her, there's a good treatment, but it's quite expensive. And she told how expensive it is. And it was an injection that costs 100 euros. And the dog got well. So I think this little example shows, okay, we have less wages, but there are also advantage to this, to a much more affordable service in terms of health. So I think this is also important to bear in mind.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. Sandra, I've got two more questions for you. One a serious one and one a less serious one. So the serious one, what do I do if the consulate or VSF office isn't offering appointments?
You wait 1 or 2 days, and for sure they will offer within 1 or 2
Okay.
days. This is the norm. Or you contact the lawyers, such as ourselves, and ask, take care of this because I'm fed up of trying to grab appointments, which is boring and a pain in the ass. So let's take care of this. Yeah.
Okay. My second question is, today is Halloween. We are not in costume. I'm not sure if you're going to wear one later, but that's sort of my question to you is,
And I'm already a witch myself. So
you're already a witch.
yeah, so I don't need a costume. And we have already a red haired of our own, serious witch in the team, which is Alexander. So we don't need more disguises.
You don't need more disguises. We know a lot of people are listening from the US. Halloween is a big thing there. Houses will be decorated. What's it like in Portugal? And you've raised children here. Did
Yeah.
your kids go trick-or-treating? Did people come to your door? What's it like?
No, people come to my door. I just went there. There are some nice ladies. They do homemade cookies just in front of my door, and they made delicious cakes. And one of the members of my team did buy some fabulous little Halloween cake. So I think it was not a tradition in Portugal, but now it's getting more and more. Perhaps it is not as it is in the States, but I think it's becoming a tradition here. And I myself, not yet, because my young one is 15-year-old, so now he doesn't want that. But 2 or 3 years or 5 years ago, I was forced to go to the neighbors with him,
Okay.
asking for cakes and sweets. That he forced me to do that. So this kind of thing a mother does for the children. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's
Okay.
becoming a more of a thing then.
Yes. Yes. Definitely.
Well, a lot of people have asked questions that are in the Q&A, but we don't have time to answer them, but they are registered in the Q&A, which means I can pass them over to Sandra's team. She can answer them directly with people. And so I know people will have been in touch already, but if they haven't, I'm going to send out an email today with the email address for you and the secret code. Sandra, we will have you on again, hopefully sometime soon, with more
Yes.
good news about how things are progressing with IMA and getting appointments and answering more questions.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. Thank you all persons for attending. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And I apologize if I didn't cover all your questions, but reach out to us. We will try to answer your questions and to whatever concerns you might have. And this is it. Thank you so much, James. It's always a pleasure to do this with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank you. Bye bye.